Sony's basically listened to me and given me the exact lens that I've been asking for since basically forever, the 20mm 1.8 G lens. How does it hold up? Let's find out. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. So you might find it strange that the one lens that I've always wanted just happened to be released by Sony, and Sony just happened to let me borrow this one for a week ahead of its release to try it out. Yeah, that is kind of strange, I guess, but thankfully coincidences work out. I've only had this for a week, so this isn't a full review or anything like that. This is much like the majority of my videos, my impressions / opinion. Seriously, there are two things I like in this camera life, and this G lens really does both, and this will run you $899. Number one, I like having a pretty darn wide, between 16 and 20-ish millimeter when I'm out of the studio recording talking head videos, because it lets me get the field of view I want, but also lets me be close enough to the camera to still physically touch it if I want to change something. Number two, I like having kinda wide, between 28 and 35 millimeter for when I do these talking head videos, because that range is just absolutely my favorite. It's wide without being too wide. And this 20 millimeter really combines it all into one package. Well, Everyday Dad, why not just try out another lens if I love the 20 millimeter range so much? Honestly, there hasn't been that much out there for the E mount that does this. The only real competition for this lens is the Sigma 20mm 1.4, which is, in all honesty, faster with its 1.4 aperture compared to the Sony's 1.8 aperture, but it's much bigger. Another negative about the Sigma 20mm is the integrated lens hood, which it's great in that it protects the bubble shape of the glass, but it makes the total lens take up more space, and you now lose out on the ability to use simple screw-on ND filters. And when you're a run-and-gun video maker or you're a solo content creator, those ND filters can really help out. Another competitor is in the new line of Tamron Prime E mount lenses with the 20mm 2.8. So right off the bat, it's 2.8 as opposed to the 1.8 on the Sony. So if you need the shallowest depths of field, or if you're recording in a cave, well, 2.8 isn't bad, but it's just not as wide or versatile. The Tamron is much smaller and cheaper though, so if you're trying to save some money and weight, it might be a good option if you don't need that extra openness of the aperture. That's really it. Two lenses owned the space until now, with one basically being brand new, and neither really hits that sweet spot for me. One is pretty big and heavy, the other is small and it's not as usable, it's not as functional. Which brings us right back to the 20mm Sony G lens. The most striking thing about this lens is how much it looks like the 24mm G Master, which we've talked about here on the channel and is probably in the running for my favorite lens of all time. And that's something that I really like about what Sony does from both a lens standpoint, but also a product standpoint in general. They aren't afraid to let their new cutting edge technology start to make its way into lower end products, because again, this is a G lens, not a G Master lens. The difference is G Master lens are the most cutting edge of Sony's imaging glass technology. The 20mm feels amazing. It's very sturdy. It has a very smooth, very great focus pull. And though I don't use these side buttons too much, hey, here's a programmable side button if you do. The filter thread is 67mm, which is awesome for me because that's kind of turning into my standard filter thread size. It's the one that I have the nicest filter for, and it balances on both my A7 III and A6600 pretty darn well. One of the negatives about the 35mm 1.8 is it's almost too small and light to really work on the A7 III that well, but the 20mm is just about perfect. For focusing, you can see it has lightning fast single shot autofocus with the A7 III and the A6600, which, I mean, that's not really all that surprising for the A6600 as it has the best autofocusing camera system I've ever seen. Quick acquisition here with no wobble back or forth. And here's a quick video autofocus test on the A6600, which you can see as I'm moving around, the camera has locked on autofocus. There is no wobble, there is no guessing. The camera and the lens are working perfectly well together to keep me in focus, and it's like a zen. The camera and the lens are one. And something else that's brought over from the 24mm G Master is the aperture control ring on the body of the lens, with its ability to do both clicked aperture and clickless aperture for those of us shooting video. Don't nobody want to hear click, 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 click as we're shooting video. Clickless aperture is huge. And again, I'm really excited and hopeful that this will show up on every Sony lens going forward. But why I was so excited in the beginning of this video is this lens really answers several requirements of mine that just weren't being fulfilled. Like I said, I do two main things. Outdoor, like location shooting, where I need a very wide angle lens, and I do talking headshots here in the studio, which I like at around 35mm, and I like using the A6600 for those because its flip up screen and great autofocus make it a snap to record indoors. And the 20mm G lens really does both well. We've already seen it outside for the autofocus test, but let's pop it on the A7 III and take it outside for a vlogging test. Okay, and welcome to the vlogging test of the 20mm G lens. Now we do have it on the A7 III. We're currently shooting in HLG and the sun is right there. So I do have this set as wide open as possible, and the shutter speed is not exactly the best for what you want. But yeah, this is like the vlogging test. The one thing that you'll see is there is no stabilization built into the lens, which is probably my biggest complaint, and we'll talk about more here in just a little bit. But I really like this. If you want a prime lens to do vlogging with, this is probably the best one you're gonna find, because the 24mm is a little too tight, and this is nice. Hopefully you can see nice and everything else out here. Look at that. Can you see? You can see where my arm's going. But I do find the autofocus to be great. I find the colors to be awesome. I find it to be incredibly sharp. Let's stand in the shade for a second, see if we can trip up the autofocus. I can't actually tell because we're on the A7 III and I can't see what we're doing right now. Okay, this has been the vlogging test. Now let's do an indoor studio test with the A6600. Okay, and now we are doing an indoor studio test with the 20mm G lens. So we did switch it out from my Tamron 17 to 28, which I've been using for practically everything, but we may be switching out to this. So yeah, this, if you wanted to use this as a studio lens, this is what you could get if you want to use it on crop sensor, which is probably what I will end up doing because it like works out. You can see it's the exact same focal length that we just had, but I can turn the ISO down in the camera, I can turn my light way down. I just think it works really well. So, okay, back to the rest of the video. And we're back. Wow, that worked perfectly great, right? I do think 1.8 is probably a tad too wide for vlogging, but you can always stop down to a more usable 2.8 if you want people to, actually know what's going on around you. Some people actually want their vlogging, their travel to be seen by people. But for width, that's pretty impressive. And something else I really like is the lack of distortion. Sometimes with really wide angle lenses, you can get this bowing out in the corner so far. And again, I've only had it a week. I haven't seen these problems here. Man, what an impressive setup. The only real negative I have with this lens is the lack of stabilization built into it. I know the newer Sony bodies have built-in image stabilization. Heck, the two cameras we use for this video do in fact have IBIS, but Sony stabilization leaves a lot to be desired, and I do wish they would help us out and include it in their prime lenses too. But should you buy one? I guess I can't really say either way whether you should go out and pre-order one, as this is a pre-production model and I haven't had that much time with it. But I can absolutely say that I'm gonna go and pre-order one. This might replace my 35mm 1.8, as it can be wider than the 35 when I need it to, but when I put it on the A6600, it can also be like the perfect focal length for this. And it might actually replace my Tamron 17 to 28 that we're currently using, because I only mainly use it at 20mm anyway. So yeah, Sony continues to dominate the mirrorless lens lineup, and I'll continue buying E-mount lenses because in my mind, they are the best on the market today. I wish so hard that I could get these to work on my S1H. I wish so much that they would work there. But if you liked this video, you might like the video where I do make a definitive statement. It doesn't happen very often, but I do make them from time to time. And I say that you should go out and buy the Sony A6600. And you can find that video by clicking here, right here. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.